The loan officer's keyboard stopped mid-click, and the silence was louder than anything I had ever heard. I had been sitting across from her for 11 minutes. I know because I counted every second the way you count when you're broke and nervous and the fluorescent lights above you are humming at exactly the frequency of your anxiety. My hands were folded in my lap. My shoes had a crack along the left sole I'd been covering with black electrical tape for 3 weeks. I had rehearsed what I was going to say. I needed $4,200 for a used Honda with 200,000 miles on it so I could drive the 40-minute commute to the hospital where I worked the overnight shift as a nurse's aide, because the bus stopped running at midnight and my shifts ended at 2 a.m. And I had been walking the last mile and a half home in the dark for the past 2 months. That was my whole life on the table. $4,200 and a crack in my shoe. The loan officer, a woman named Deborah with reading glasses on a beaded chain, had started typing the moment I slid my ID across the desk. Standard credit check. I had braced myself. I knew what she would find. 29 years old, no credit history worth mentioning. A checking account with a balance that embarrassed me even in private. But she wasn't looking at my checking account. She had gone very still. "Ms. Calloway," she said carefully, and the way she said my name made my stomach drop. "Not Nora, Ms. Calloway, the way you address someone when you're no longer sure who they are? Can I ask you to wait here for just one moment?" She stood up before I could answer and walked quickly toward the back of the branch, disappearing through a door I couldn't see past. I sat there with my purse on my knees and my taped-together shoe on the floor and the very specific cold feeling of a person who has learned from experience that when something unexpected happens to them, it is never good. I waited 7 minutes. I know because I counted those too. When the door opened again, Deborah wasn't alone. She was walking behind a man in a dark suit I had never seen before. Someone who did not work at this bank. Someone who moved through the room with the particular stillness of a person who is used to being in control of situations that have spiraled past other people's understanding. He was maybe 50, silver at the temples, carrying a tablet and a leather portfolio that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. He sat down across from me in Deborah's chair and folded his hands on the desk. "Nora Calloway," he said. "My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm a senior investigator with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." He paused, watching my face. "Do you know why I'm here?" I said I absolutely did not. He turned the tablet around. On the screen was a financial document I didn't recognize at first, dense with numbers and legal language, but there was my name at the top. Nora Calloway. And below it, a trust account number, and below that, a balance that made me lean forward in my chair because I was certain I had misread it. I had not misread it. "This trust was established in your name in 1998, Reeves said quietly. "It has been accruing interest for 26 years. The current balance is $4,300,000. He let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. "You have never accessed it. You have never been notified of its existence. And the man listed as your legal trustee has been drawing from it every single year since it was opened." The branch was making normal branch noises around me. A teller was counting cash. Someone's phone rang. Deborah was standing by the back wall holding her own elbows. I felt the room tilt the same way a ship tilts, slowly, like the floor is fine until it isn't. "Who is the trustee?" I asked. "Reeves," said the name, and I felt something shift in my chest, something that had been calcified for 20 years, cracking apart like old concrete. "Martin Hale, my guardian. If you found out the person who spent 20 years telling you that you were lucky to have a roof over your head was quietly draining a fortune that belonged to you, would you collapse, or would you need to know everything first?" I needed to know everything first. I have always needed to understand things before I can feel them. It is the only way I have ever survived. I had lived with Martin Hale since I was 3 years old. He was not a relative. He had been my parents' attorney, appointed as my emergency legal guardian after they were killed in a car accident on Route 9 outside of Asheville when I was 3.5. That was what I had been told. That was the whole story as I had received it. A wet road, a guardrail, a night in November. My parents were gone and Martin was there, and that was the shape of my life. Martin was meticulous and cold, the way certain intelligent men are cold. The kind of cold that gets mistaken for dignity. He wore pressed shirts on weekends. He kept a ledger of every expense I generated, which he reviewed with me annually on my birthday, a tradition I had understood as a child to be a gesture of financial transparency and understood now, sitting across from a federal investigator, to be something else entirely. He never struck me. He fed me. He sent me to public school and did not attend any of my graduations. When I turned 18, he sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that my parents had left nothing, that the estate had been consumed by legal fees and outstanding debts, and that I would need to support myself going forward. He said it the way you say the weather. I had believed him. I had gone to community college on Pell Grants and worked cafeteria shifts, and then got my CNA certification, and then the overnight shift at Mercy General, and the shoe with the crack in it, and $4,200 for a Honda. And every single year, Martin Hale had been writing himself checks from a trust fund with my name on the top. Reeves slid a folder across the desk. Quarterly withdrawals. Consistent, deliberate, never enough to trigger an automatic audit flag, always just below the reporting threshold. 26 years of it. How long have you known? I asked. We opened the investigation 8 months ago, he said. We needed you to come to us so the record is clean. If we'd approached you first, his attorneys would have argued coercion. He looked at me steadily. The credit check triggered a flag we'd been waiting for. They had been waiting for me to walk into a bank. My parents, I said, and my voice came out steady, which surprised me. The accident. Reeves's expression shifted by a fraction. That's the second part of what we need to discuss. He took a single sheet from the portfolio and set it down in front of me. It was a crash reconstruction report. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood the conclusion section, which was written in plain language the way legal conclusions sometimes are when they want to be unambiguous. The accident that killed my parents in November of 1997 showed evidence of brake line tampering consistent with deliberate sabotage. The room stopped being a room for a moment. My parents were murdered, I said. The investigation into the original accident was closed as accidental. We believe it was closed incorrectly. Reeves held my gaze. We also believe Martin Hale had a financial motive. Your parents' company, Calloway Industrial Supply, had a controlling interest worth approximately $11 million in 1997. When they died, Hale administered the estate. The company was liquidated within 2 years at a significant loss. The proceeds went into accounts he controlled. I thought about Martin's pressed shirts. I thought about the ledger. I thought about the way he had handed me a list of my own expenses every year on my birthday, and watched me read it with an expression I had always interpreted as patience. And I understood now was something more like satisfaction. He hadn't raised me because he had to. He hadn't raised me because he felt responsible. He had kept me close because I was the only person alive who could legally challenge what he had taken, and a child who believes she is a burden does not challenge anything. Every time he reminded me that I had cost him something, he was building a wall. Every time he made me feel like my existence was a debt I would spend my whole life repaying, he was making sure I would never look behind the curtain. He had spent 20 years training me to be grateful for my own dispossession. The anger that came then was not hot. It was the kind of cold that has a temperature below what thermometers measure. It was clarifying. It was the opposite of confusion. I told Reeves I would cooperate with everything he needed. He gave me a card and told me to act normally and said there would be a follow-up meeting the next day at the federal field office with a full briefing. He shook my hand with both of his. He looked at me like I was something that had been missing for a long time. I drove home in the car I had borrowed from my coworker Sheila, the one with the broken heat in the passenger window that wouldn't seal, and I sat outside my apartment building for 40 minutes before I went inside. I did not cry. I was not ready to cry yet. I was still in the part where understanding comes before feeling. The next morning, I wore my good scrubs and took the bus to the federal field office on Meridian Street, and Reeves was there with 2 other agents and a woman named Patricia Suarez, who was an assistant U.S. attorney. small and precise, and wearing a blazer the color of authority. They walked me through the full scope of it over 3 hours. The trust, the tampered brake lines, the estate liquidation, the shell companies. Martin had been thorough. He was the kind of man who planned things in advance because he understood that patience was its own kind of armor. But he had made one mistake. He had kept me. A dead beneficiary would have attracted too much scrutiny. A living ward who believed she was penniless was the perfect cover. No one investigates a trust when the name beneficiary appears to be alive and uninterested. No one looks twice at an orphan who turned out ordinary. I asked Patricia Suarez what charges we were looking at. She opened a document and read them in the same tone Reeves had used, calm and precise, which I was starting to understand was how people talked when the things they were saying were large enough to require understatement. Wire fraud, tax evasion spanning 2 decades, breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent administration of an estate, and at the top of the list, the charge that carried the most weight, a RICO count, because Martin Hale had not acted alone. There were 2 other men, a former county auditor and a business broker, who had participated in the liquidation scheme. 3 people had coordinated across multiple jurisdictions over more than 20 years to strip the Calloway estate and keep me in the dark. RICO has no statute of limitations that protects you when the conspiracy is still ongoing. Every year Martin had drawn from the trust, the clock had reset. Every check he had written himself was a new act within the same criminal enterprise. I felt something shift in the room when Suarez said that, a kind of pressure releasing. Martin was not going to walk out of this on a technicality. He had been too careful for too long, and that carefulness was now the record of his crime. They asked me to do one more thing. They needed me to go to Martin's office for a scheduled meeting, something routine he had arranged 2 weeks before, a quarterly check-in he had insisted on maintaining even though I was an adult, even though I worked nights and had to rearrange my sleep schedule every time. I had always gone. I had always assumed the meetings were his way of maintaining the fiction of guardianship, of staying in the role because the role was comfortable for him. Now I understood they were surveillance. He needed to keep watching me to make sure I stayed small. They wired me. The device was smaller than I expected, a flat adhesive square between my shoulder blades. I drove to Martin's office building in downtown Raleigh on a Thursday afternoon, and I sat in the parking garage for 4 minutes, breathing the way you breathe when the thing you have to do is the hardest version of a thing you've been doing your whole life. I had been performing smallness for Martin Hale since I was 3 years old. I just had to perform it one more time. His office was on the 14th floor. He had the corner suite that looked over the city. He was standing at the window when I came in his pressed Friday shirt even though it was Thursday, and he turned around with the same expression he had always had for me, not warm exactly, not cold exactly. The particular expression of a man who has decided what you are worth and found the number comfortable. "Nora," he said, "you look tired." I told him I had been working nights. He gestured at the chair across from his desk, the smaller one, the one with the shorter legs that I had sat in every quarter for 6 years, the one that made you look up at him from a slight angle, which I now understood had not been accidental. We went through the ritual. He asked about work. He made a comment about my apartment that was not quite a criticism and not quite concern, the space between them where he had always lived. He poured himself a glass of water from the carafe on his desk and did not offer me one. I had noticed that my whole life and filed it under the category of small humiliations, the kind too minor to mention, the kind that accumulate into a posture. I asked about the trust. It came out steadier than I expected, clear and direct, the way you ask about something you have a right to know about. His hand on the carafe did not move, but his knuckles changed color. "What trust?" he said. I told him the name of the bank. I told him the account number. I told him the balance as of the previous morning. The silence in the room had texture. It was the silence of a man doing rapid mathematics, calculating what I could know versus what I could prove versus how much time he had to construct a response that would put me back where I belonged. That account has been dormant for years, he said, smooth and immediate, the way he had always been smooth and immediate when I had asked questions as a child, the way that made me feel like I had misunderstood something obvious. There were administrative holds, legal complications with the estate I was working to resolve. I was going to bring this to your attention at the appropriate time. You've been drawing from it since 1998, I said. Reimbursements, he said, for the costs of your care. Guardianship has significant legal and financial overhead, Nora. I absorbed considerable expense on your behalf. I have documentation for every. The account draws were not documented as reimbursements, I said. They were drawn to a shell company you registered in Delaware in 2001. The company has no employees and no declared business activity. He was very still. I watched him recalibrate. I had never seen it happen before, because I had never been the threat that required recalibration. I had always been the ward. The quiet one. The tired one. Who was grateful for the chair. You don't understand how estate law works, he said, and his voice had moved toward something harder, the edge beneath the smoothness. You're a nursing aide, Nora. You walked in here with a story someone fed you, and you think you understand 20 years of complex financial administration. You don't. There it was, the whole architecture of it in 2 sentences. You are not smart enough to understand what was done to your own life. Be grateful someone else handled it. I had believed that my whole life. I had modified my own ambitions to fit inside the space that belief left available. I had not applied to the 4-year nursing program because I didn't think I was capable, and the reason I didn't think I was capable was a sentence exactly like that one, delivered across a desk exactly like this one, in a tone that was not cruel enough to fight, but not kind enough to rest in. I looked at Martin Hale and I felt the full weight of 26 years lift off me like something physical. My parents didn't leave nothing, I said. He opened his mouth. They left me a company and a trust fund and a life, and you spent 2.5 decades making sure I never knew it existed. I kept my voice level. The brake lines on their car were cut. The FNCE has the reconstruction report. A grand jury was convened 6 months ago. The color left his face in a way I hadn't seen happen to a person before, not gradually, but all at once, like a switch. You should be very careful, he said quietly. I have a wire, I said. I've been recording this conversation for the past 12 minutes, and then something happened that I had not expected and had not been briefed on and would not understand until later that afternoon when Suarez explained it to me. Martin Hale did not call his attorney. He did not ask me to leave. He sat back in his chair behind the expensive desk in the corner office overlooking the city he had operated in for 30 years, and he started to laugh. It was not the laugh of a man who thought something was funny. It was the laugh of a man who has been holding a structure together through force of will for so long that when it finally comes down, the physical release feels involuntary. You have no idea, he said, still laughing, wiping his eye with one knuckle, how long I have been waiting for this. I didn't understand. I told him so. He leaned forward. I've been cooperating with a federal investigation for 4 months, he said. The 2 men who convinced me to participate in the original liquidation in 1999, Garland and Ruiz. They are not small actors, Nora. They are connected to a network of estate fraud operations across 7 states. I got in because I was young and greedy and they had leverage on me, and I have spent 26 years trying to find a way out that didn't end with me in the ground. He held my gaze. I have been the one feeding documents to the FNCE. I asked for a cooperating witness agreement 3 months ago. The room rearranged itself. You drew from the trust, I said. I drew from the trust so that Garland and Ruiz believed I was still compliant. If I had stopped, they would have known I flipped. He set his hands flat on the desk. Every dollar I drew is in a separate escrow account earmarked for full restitution. It has been since January. I did not know what to do with this. I had come in here carrying 26 years of accumulated quiet rage, and the target of it had turned into something I did not have a category for. My parents, I said. He was quiet for a long time. The brake lines, he said at last, were Garland's work. I did not know until 4 years after the fact. By then, I was in deep enough that knowing made me more trapped, not less. He looked out the window. I have thought about your parents every day of my life since 2001. I know that doesn't fix anything. It didn't. It also didn't fit cleanly into the story I had walked in with. The one with clean edges and a villain who is purely a villain, and I think I understood in that moment why people find it easier to have enemies than to have complicated human wreckage. Enemies you can be done with. Complicated wreckage you have to carry somewhere. I asked him about the chair with the short legs. He looked at it, then at me, and he had the grace to look ashamed. Old habit, he said quietly. I told myself I kept it because it reminded me what I owed you. I know that's not what it was. 3 weeks later, Marcus Garland and Roberto Ruiz were arrested at a conference in Charlotte, where they had been running a seminar on estate planning. The irony was apparently not lost on the agents who made the arrests. Garland had a private flight booked for that evening to a country with limited extradition agreements. Ruiz's attorneys argued for bail. The judge denied it with a single sentence. Martin's cooperating witness agreement covered the financial fraud charges. He forfeited his law license, his corner office, and a retirement account he had been building since 1992. He was sentenced to 3 years of supervised release and 450 hours of community service working with a legal aid organization that represented children in guardianship disputes. I was told about the last part separately by Suarez, who delivered the information in a neutral tone that told me nothing about whether it had been the judge's idea or a condition Martin had requested himself. The trust, plus interest, plus a civil judgment against the Garland and Ruiz operation, plus the recovered proceeds from the Calloway industrial liquidation that had been held in offshore accounts, came to just over $8 million. My name on every document. My parents' company had been worth more than any of them had told me. Patricia Suarez handed me the asset transfer paperwork in her office on a Wednesday morning, and I signed it with a pen that had her law school printed on the side, and she shook my hand and said, "Do you have any questions?" I had approximately 400 questions. I started with the most practical one, which was whether there was anything that required my immediate attention, and she said no. The accounts were already in my name and accessible, and I could take as much time as I needed. I took 3 days. I drove to Asheville on a Saturday, which I had never done before, which I had avoided for reasons I could not have clearly named except that Asheville was where my parents had died and I had been taught without being taught not to go looking at things that would make me ask questions. I drove through the town and past the highway where Route 9 curved near the mountain. I didn't stop. I just drove past and kept going. I found the cemetery on my own because it was in the public records and I had my phone and I was a person who had recently discovered that information was something I was allowed to have. Their headstones were side by side, granite, clean. Someone had left flowers recently, something yellow. I didn't know who. I stood there for a long time and didn't say anything because I didn't know yet what I wanted to say. And I have always believed that silence is better than the wrong words. On the drive home, I thought about the loan officer Deborah and her keyboard going still and the particular silence of a thing that has just changed everything. I thought about the 11 minutes I had counted while waiting. I thought about the taped shoe in my closet at home, which I had not thrown out yet, which I was keeping for a reason I hadn't examined closely. I think I was keeping it so I would remember what it felt like to need $4,200 and believe that was the whole shape of what was possible for me. I think I was keeping it so that if I ever stood in a room with a short-legged chair pointed at me, I would know to look at the chair. I enrolled in the RN Bridge program that fall. Full tuition paid, no loans. The commute was easy because I bought the Honda, and then a month later, I bought a better car and sold the Honda to a nursing student at my program who needed it more than I did. I kept the electrical tape from the shoe in my junk drawer, not as a symbol, just as a reminder that I had walked 1.5 miles home in the dark for 2 months and it had not broken me. What had been done to me was real. The years of it, the careful architecture of smallness that had been built around me, the way a person's understanding of themselves can be shaped and limited and handed back to them as the truth, all of it was real. I don't believe in tidy resolutions. I believe in incremental reclamations, in deciding every morning that you are the one who gets to decide what you are worth, not the person who gave you the chair, not the ledger, not the 26 years of careful diminishment. I think about my parents sometimes the way you think about people you never really knew, with a particular tenderness and a particular grief, because the absence is shaped like a presence, because you can feel the exact outline of what isn't there. I don't know yet what they were like. I know what their company was worth. I know that they had an attorney they trusted, and I know what that trust cost them. And I know that none of it was their fault and none of it was mine either. There is a photograph I found in the probate records, a family photo taken the summer before they died. My father has his arm around my mother's shoulders. She is laughing at something off camera. I am 3 years old and sitting in the grass in front of them, and I appeared to be deeply interested in a stick. I had it framed. It's on my desk at home. On nights when I finish a long shift and drive home in the dark and let myself into my apartment and stand in the kitchen drinking water before bed, I look at it sometimes. 3 people who were supposed to have a whole long story together, one of whom made it here, one of whom is working on figuring out what that means. I think I'm going to be okay. I think I have been okay for longer than I knew. I just needed someone to stop typing and tell me what was in the file.